As the holiday season arrived again this year, the airways began to shift to the classical holiday songs, one of which we will inevitably hear daily for a couple more weeks is Brenda Lee's 1958 classic, Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree. An NPR interviewer spoke with the now 78-year-old artist, and I learned during that interview that Brenda Lee was just 13 years old when she recorded that song. 13. And they have been playing it to death for 65 years. I don't know what comes to mind for you when you first learned that, but what immediately struck me is that this young woman was set for life at 13 on the strength of one song. Now, she went on to have a singing career, but honestly, she didn't have to. She's not Elon Musk or Bill Gates rich, but her net worth is currently $20 million, and that doesn't even add up what all she's earned over the last 65 years off of that song. I doubt that very much of her 20 million came from her recording of Toot Toot Tootsie. I had a similar reaction when I learned that the beautiful actress who first played Queen Amidala, Natalie Portman, in the 1999 Star Wars movie The Phantom Menace, that she was only 16 years old when she started filming in that role. I loved the movie, but I was immediately envious of the fact that at the age of 16, when her career was just starting, that she was already financially set up for the rest of her life, regardless of all of the other wonderful movies that she's appeared in. Of course, there are people who are trust fund babies born into the security of family wealth, but it seems somehow different when you can see someone move from obscurity into lifelong security in a single gesture during their teenage years. Our American economy is structured to literally fill us with anxiety from our birth. How are we going to survive? We have turned getting an education into nothing more than a means of sharpening our prospects for employment. We avoid universal health care in this country and tie any affordable health care option directly to employment, compounding our fear of the future with uncertainty about where will we live? Will we be able to eat? Will we be able to see a doctor when we're sick? And oh my God, what if I become disabled or pregnant? Or what if there's another recession or, God forbid, another Great Depression? The American economy for the working class is built on fear and dread, even though, ironically, we are not just the richest country in the world, we are the richest country in human history. Maybe that anxiety has helped to turn our Protestant work ethic into some national wealth, but it sure hasn't done much to make us happier, has it? It hasn't really fostered mental health in our society. We didn't hear much about the hard fought-for battles to establish a 40-hour work week or to safeguard a 2-day weekend for most workers when we were in our public school history classes. But I can tell you that whatever semblance of employment security that we have, whatever safety and fair compensation that we now enjoy, that those things came with a bloody price tag. Still, in the USA, if you're lucky enough to have paid vacation at all, it's almost never more than 2 weeks, 10 paid days off. And many employers offer exactly none. For most of my adult life as a pastor, I officially had 4 weeks of vacation, but my workload was such that I never got to take it. At times, I went years without taking any vacation days, obviously still working weekends and holidays, and rarely getting 24 hours off in any week. And there was always some board member that still seemed to insinuate that I was lazy. But let me just clue you in about paid vacations around the world. Only Micronesia gets fewer vacation days than Americans. We get 10 and they get 9. But Mexico gets 14. Canadians get 19 days off, and most of Central and South America gets between 27 and 32 days off. Our allies in Western Europe are all way ahead of us. Great Britain gets 28 days of paid vacation, except for Scotland, and they get 38. Most of Europe and Africa get about a month of vacation every year. What's more, think about the countries that we tend to think of as being heartless nations or bad about human rights. China gives their population 16 days of paid vacation. Russians get 42, and the nation with the most generous paid vacation laws is Iran with 52. And in the United States, if a woman gets any paid leave after childbirth, it's nearly a miracle. Russia, as bad as we typically tend to portray them as being, they will give a woman 1 year of 100% pay, a second year with 60% pay, and if she wants to take off a third year, she's guaranteed to keep her position and be able to come back to it after 3 years off with a new birth. Because people, as much as this comes as a surprise to many Americans, there is more to life than going to work. When I turned 65, rather than retiring entirely, I split my job in half with our friend David Ketchum. The idea was that we could both work half-time so we could begin to figure out different ways of dividing up our church duties so that I could have more time off and travel more. My first 2-week vacation ever came right after my 65th birthday. I took my scuba gear to Cozumel, where I rented a 1-bedroom apartment a few miles in from the beach, where I was surrounded by other international vacationers who were finding a place to live on the cheap. I met a delightful 30-something couple at the pool in my apartment complex, and they were there living a very frugal life in a tiny apartment. He was from Argentina, she was from Kansas. They had met when they were both working in a hotel in Australia, and they had decided that they would work for a few months, save every dime that they could, and then not work at all until they had to go back to work to make money to pay rent or to buy groceries. They were managing to work less than half of the year every year. And I have to tell you, when I heard that story, I have never experienced so much self-doubt about the choices that I have made in my life and in my career. I've always taken vacations only when I was at the point of exhaustion. I would lay down my axe and take a few days off when I felt drained, burned out, sometimes even at the breaking point. They were working only when they had to eat. I'm sure that their parents thought they were horribly irresponsible. I would die if my daughter tried to do the same thing. And yet, even though they were not saving for retirement, and they certainly didn't own a car or house, but guys, they had broken through the myth that tells us that we only exist to work. They had conquered the fundamental fear of hunger and poverty. So let me say it to you again. You were born for more than just going to work every day. I have realized that as I have pulled my work schedule back from constantly leaning forward in the saddle, that not taking enough time off is the largest reason why I was never more successful in my career than I was. I was so ambitious, so afraid of failure, that my life was entirely out of balance. I wanted to be the best pastor. I wanted to be the best counselor. I wanted to be the best preacher, the best at presiding over weddings and baptisms and funerals. Folks, I even took singing and guitar lessons because I thought I might be a better minister if I could help out with the music program. That, I will tell you now, was a colossal waste of time and money. I don't wish that I could have lived my adult life as the friends I met in Mexico were doing it. I didn't need to be liberated from work for several months out of the year, but I do think I needed to step back and try to find a more sane and balanced life, to gain perspective, to understand why working harder and more hours wasn't making me more popular or more successful. And what I'm going to say to you now may be more specific to life as a Protestant pastor than to anything else, but I hope it has some application for all of you. When I entered the ministry in the late 1970s, churches had just come through a boom time that was all a part of the baby boom in post-World War America. World War II created the technological and economic innovations that created the middle class. And it came with suburbs and suburban churches with their huge edifices that later generations simply couldn't fill. In 1991, I became the senior pastor of this sprawling Georgian colonial church whose sanctuary only seated 250 people, but the two education wings on either side provided classroom space for 500 people. In the 1960s, it had seemed reasonable to this church that they could fill the sanctuary twice every Sunday and fill their Sunday school classes with 500 people every week. But in the 1970s, as families became smaller and divorce became more common, such that kids were not there every week, that Sunday school attendance began to fall off, and in the 1980s, mainstream church attendance started to decline. But the church of that era still had an active memory of when in the 50s and 60s they had been full, and they were desperate to return to those days without any accounting for how the world itself had changed. There was pressure put on me and every minister of my generation to recreate a successful church in the 1990s that looked like the churches of the 1950s and 60s. We tried to rebuild the youth groups, the children's choirs, the Sunday school classes, church camp, vacation Bible school, things that frankly belonged to another era and no longer had application for people in the modern world. By the early part of this century, I realized that we were spending so much money on staff and attractive technology and entertainment, trying to attract the children of that generation, that we could have been more successful if we had just found kids that we could pay $15 an hour to attend. I was desperate to the point of panic, wanting to be successful, but I never stepped back far enough to realize that a successful church of the 21st century would not look at all like a successful church of the mid-20th century. When I left that church in 2007, the denomination still required that ministers fill out annual reports to tell the denomination how successful we had been in the previous year, and we told them by giving them numbers. What was our average attendance? How many new members had we brought in that year? How many people had we baptized? How much capital money was raised for new buildings? And what was the weekly offering? They wanted us to count what could be counted without ever asking ourselves what actually counted in ministry, the things that cannot be counted in any objective way. Marriages saved, suicides prevented, moral encouragement and instruction given, direction, meaning, training and compassion, opportunities to show compassion in programs of real service to those in need. No one ever asked about those things, which necessarily means that those things really didn't matter to the denomination as much as donations, attendance, numerical growth. I wish that I could go back in time to tell my 35-year-old self these things, but I'm not sure that even if I could, that I would have believed it. Still, even when I moved past formal Christianity and got out of the prison of institutional church life, I poured my energy into being a social activist. I fought against injustice with the same passion that I had expended trying to fill up a huge church in my earlier years. We are living in a dynamic time. Somehow, at the end of 2023, nearly half of our country seems determined to destroy our constitutional democracy and to replace it with a fascist dictatorship that will take away civil rights, oppress minorities, and inflict unspeakable cruelties on people that will make only getting 10 days of paid vacation every year seem unimportant. The worst possible things are increasingly probable for the future of our country, and somehow these horrible things are likely to be voted in by popular vote. It feels like America is living out an opposite day every single day. It makes no sense to me at all. Yet I am advocating for intentional balancing in a world that is desperately in need of action, of leadership, of greater personal investment and greater personal involvement. But because the need is so great, leading a balanced life is just that much more important. Because the world seems almost to be teetering on the edge of self-destruction, you should take time to go to the beach, to take a walk in the woods, to spend an evening in conversation with friends. Go out and hear live music, attend a live theater production. How long has it been since you've had a meal with your family without cell phones or a TV on in the background? Do you even know what exhibits are currently at your local art museum? Or are you just living to go to work? I'm suggesting that you spend some time with your family over the holidays. Let your inner child come out to play a bit at Christmas. Wear the ugly sweater, drink the punch, spend too much on elaborate gifts, eat too much, and regain some memory of why you're alive in the first place and some perspective on what you're actually doing with your life. I hope you have a great Christmas, and I'll see you again on New Year's Eve.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.